Sections 3.1 and 3.2 continued. In the first video, we discussed what negation, conjunction, and disjunction all meant, and the symbols for each of those. We do have two more symbols to talk about, but before we do that, let's take a look at some of the more challenging examples that you're going to see in the homework. Looking next to the double asterisk, it says that the simple statements that are on the same side of the comma are to be grouped together within parentheses when converting these statements into symbolic form. So pretty much, you want to make sure that you are on the lookout for 3 or more ideas within the same sentence. So if you have a P, Q, and an R, 3 ideas, then we are going to care about the location of the comma because that tells us where mathematically to put our parentheses. So as an example, it says to convert the following statements to symbolic form. So again, we're going from the English language to math symbols. Then we're going to classify each statement as a conjunction or a disjunction. Looking at part A, Pink is a singer, or Gina Davis is an actress, and Dallas is in Texas. So I see 3 separate ideas. So I am going to come back to this comma where it's located at. If it's just 2 ideas, we don't care about the comma mathematically speaking, but 3 or more ideas, we care about the comma. To begin step 1, we got to assign letters starting with the letter P to represent each of the ideas. I'll do that in blue. So we start with P, traditionally in logic. We're going to let P represent the first idea, so we're going to read back through the sentence again. The first idea that we encounter is Pink is a singer. So let P represent the idea that Pink is a singer. The next idea is that Gina Davis is an actress. We're not judging these ideas to be true or false yet, by the way. That's going to come later in the chapter. Right now, our mission is just simply to convert this to math symbols. So going down the alphabet from P, I'm going to let Q represent that Gina Davis is an actress. And the third idea, Dallas is in Texas. So this is the first example we've seen thus far where we have 3 ideas. So we have an R. So let R represent that Dallas is in Texas. And that's what I mean by 3 separate ideas you have up through the letter R, all in the same sentence. So that is your cue to look for that comma because it's going to affect where we plunk down parentheses. Step 2, we go back through the sentence yet again and bring in the symbols. The first idea, I'm going to go back to, actually let's use the black pen here. Pink is a singer was the first idea, which is represented by the letter P. Took care of that, so I'm going to slash through it. Next up is the word or, which is the down arrow, the disjunction down arrow that we talked about in the previous video. Check. Next up, Gina Davis is an actress, which is the letter Q. And because we then hit the comma, those 2 ideas, Pink is a singer or Gina Davis is an actress, because they're on the same side of the comma, they're both to the left of the comma, they need to be grouped within parentheses. So I'm putting parentheses around P or Q, and then I took care, check, of the comma. After the comma, we see the word and, which is the up arrow, the conjunction. And finally, Dallas is in Texas was the letter R. So I'm circling the final answer in black. Parentheses P or Q, close the parentheses, and R. It is definitely important, we're going to see later in the chapter when we do truth tables, that we put parentheses in when you see 3 or more ideas. You put the parentheses around the letters that represent the ideas that are on the same side of the comma. let's take a look at one more example. Oh, but before we do that, I almost forgot the second set of directions. We need to classify each statement as a conjunction or disjunction. You're going to look at the symbol that's not a letter. So your non-letter symbol, typically it's an arrow. The arrow that's outside the parentheses, and that's going to be its official classification. So looking at my previous answer, the up arrow, the and, is a conjunction. And therefore, that is my classification. So again, the arrow, whatever is not a letter that's outside the parentheses, that's your classification on the homework. Now looking at B, it says dinner includes soup, comma, and salad or the vegetable of the day. So step one, we got to assign our letters to represent each of the ideas again. So let P represent, we go back through the sentence, that dinner includes soup. The second idea is that dinner includes salad. I'll just shorthand it to include salad. And there is a third idea, vegetable of the day. So let R represent that dinner includes vegetable of the day. And I'll just shorthand it again to includes vegetable. As soon as I see three different letters, three different ideas, that tells me, hey, don't forget to look for the comma, because that's going to tell me where to put those parentheses. Got to go now back through the sentence yet again for step 2, where we can actually bring in the symbols. So first up, dinner includes soup. That was the letter P. Check. Now the comma hits a lot earlier in the sentence than in example A, so I'm going to come back to that comma. I hit the word and, so that's the up arrow. Check. Salad was the letter Q. Check. I hit the word or, which is the down arrow, disjunction down arrow. Check. Vegetable of the day was the letter R. Not done yet. So now when I go back and look at the comma strikes before and salad or the vegetable of the day. So the last two letters representing the last two ideas need to be grouped within parentheses. So Q or R representing salad or vegetable of the day. They're both after the comma, to the right-hand side of the comma, so they do need parentheses around them. Just be really careful here, because regardless if they have the comma after soup or after the word and, my left parenthesis still goes after the arrow. So my parenthesis, one of the parentheses will always be hugging an arrow. This parenthesis is hugging, it's touching the up arrow for and, whereas in part A, my arrow was touching the parenthesis again. So I would not put the left parenthesis before the up arrow. So that would be my final answer. Now let's go ahead and do the classification. We look for the arrow outside parentheses. It just happens to be the up arrow again. So this is classified as another conjunction. When the negation symbol is placed in front of parentheses, it negates the entire statement that's in those parentheses. That negation is then read as it is not true that, or it is false that. So in other words, most of the time, we're used to that negation, that little squiggle tilde, coming before a letter. There is a time, there's a chance that the negation can come in front of a left parenthesis rather than a letter though. When that happens, you are going to read this out loud as it is not true that, or it is false that. You can read it out loud either way. So negation symbol, that squiggle in front of parentheses, equals it is not true that, or you could say it is false that. Same going backwards. If you see the phrase it is not true that or it is false that, and they ask you to use math symbols, you will put that negation symbol in front of parentheses rather than in front of a letter. So looking at our example, it already assigns letters for us. It says let P represent that Joseph is making breakfast. Let Q represent that Anne is setting the table. Write the following symbolic statements in words. So we're going backwards for a change. They're giving us the math symbols, and our mission is to translate that into the English wording. I'll do it in blue. We're going to go in the same order as the letters from left to right. So first in A, I see a P, because I have P and not Q. So first I see the P, which represents about Joseph making breakfast. So Joseph is making breakfast. I'm going to erase a little bit, give myself some room. Then we have the up arrow for and you could certainly use the word and. However, if I look ahead, and not Q is going to be that Anne is not setting the table. So it might make more sense, instead of the word and, to use the word but. It has the same meaning as the word and anyway. So your choice, and, but, however, nevertheless, any of those words work when you see the up arrow. So I'm going to say the word but. It honestly, mathematically anyway, does not matter if you put the comma or not, because we only have two different letters, two different ideas. Remember, it's only when we have 3 or more ideas that we care about where the comma would go. So I am going to put a comma. So Joseph is making breakfast, but not Q. Anne is not setting the table. Joseph is making breakfast, but Anne is not setting the table. Taking a look at B, there's that negation symbol, that squiggle, in front of the parentheses rather than in front of a letter. So that's our cue. We can either say it is not true that, or we can say it is false that, your choice. I'm going to say it is not true that. And as soon as I jot that down, I've taken care of the negation symbol in front of the parenthesis. Then I write everything inside the parentheses as normal. So next I hit the letter P, which is Joseph is making breakfast. The up arrow, which you can use and, but, however, nevertheless. If I'm looking ahead, and Q, the word and would make the most sense. So I'm going to say and. Q was Anne is setting the table. Check, that takes care of that. So my final answer, it is not true that Joseph is making breakfast and Anne is setting the table. On to our fourth symbol out of the 5 that we're going to encounter throughout chapter 3 when we're studying logic. In my previous video, I mentioned 3 out of the 5. We talked about the negation symbol, the conjunction symbol, and the disjunction symbol. The 4th symbol is the conditional, and it's symbolized by, surprise, surprise, yet another arrow. This time the arrow is pointing to the right. We read this out loud as if then. If you only see the word if, you're going to treat it as an if then as well. So if or if then means you use this arrow pointing to the right. The if portion will go to the left-hand side of the arrow, and whatever's in the then part of the sentence will go to the right-hand side of this arrow. So as an example, Let P represent the idea that the portrait is pastel. Let Q represent the idea that the portrait is by Beth Anderson. Write the following statements symbolically. So we're going from English language to math symbols. They've done step 1 for us. They've already assigned letters, so we can jump right into step 2, the final answer. Looking at A, it says if the portrait is by Beth Anderson, then the portrait is not a pastel. I see those key words, if, then, so that tells me I'm going to use my new arrow, the arrow pointing to the right. In the if portion, it says the portrait is by Beth Anderson. Don't let them trick you. They're starting you off with Q, because Q represents the Beth Anderson part. So Q goes on the if side, the left-hand side of my if-then arrow. On the then side, the portrait is not a pastel, so I need to negate. So that's that tilde squiggle. Pastel was the letter P. I'd read this out loud. If Q, then not P. That's my final answer. When we go to type that into the My Math Lab homework, you're going to want to click in the answer box, and a template will appear below the question that will enable you to type in that arrow. You can use the keyboard to type in the letters, and it's your choice if you want to use the template or the keyboard to type in that tilde symbol for the negation. B, let's try another one. It is false that if the portrait is by Beth Anderson, then the portrait is a pastel. So thinking back to our last slide, it is false that means we throw down a negation tilde followed immediately by a left parenthesis. Then we finish it up by putting the rest of the sentence inside those parentheses. I now see the phrase if then, so I'm going to have my if then arrow. You should always have letters on either side of any arrow. On the if portion, the left-hand side of that arrow, the portrait is by Beth Anderson, which is the letter Q. After the word then, so on the right-hand side of the if-then arrow, the portrait is a pastel, which was the letter P. I finished the sentence, so I just need to close my parentheses, and there's my final answer. Negation parentheses, if Q, then P. The fifth and final symbol we're going to see throughout this chapter is called a biconditional. We just mentioned on the last slide that a conditional is an arrow pointing to the right. The prefix bi means two, so you're going to see two arrowheads. This is related to the phrase if and only if. And it means a conditional going in both directions. So if this, then this, and vice versa. If that, then this. For example, let's let P represent that the Tampa Bay Lightning win the Stanley Cup. Let Q represent that Martin St. Louis is the MVP. We want to write the following statement in words. P, if and only if, Q. So going left to right, I first see the letter P, which represents the Tampa Bay Lightning win the Stanley Cup. And I'm going to abbreviate Tampa Bay Lightning TBL. So the Tampa Bay Lightning win the Stanley Cup. Check. As soon as I hit that biconditional double arrow, insert the entire phrase, if and only if. If and only if. And finally, I see just a normal Q, not a negation Q. So Q was Martin St. Louis is the MVP. So biconditional, insert if and only if, and you're good to go. Final answer is the Tampa Bay Lightning win the Stanley Cup if and only if Martin St. Louis is the MVP. What this means is if the Tampa Bay Lightning win the Stanley Cup, then Martin St. Louis is the MVP. And going backwards, if Martin St. Louis is the MVP, then the Tampa Bay Lightning win the Stanley Cup. I know I've thrown a lot of symbols at you between the last two videos here. So let's just summarize, fill in this table, just to make sure we have everything down pat. The first symbol was the negation. And the symbol for that was the little tilde, the squiggle symbol. We read this out loud as the word not. An example of using it in symbolic form, most of the time we put it before a letter to negate an idea. Sometimes you'll see it in front of a parenthesis, for it is not true that or it is false that, but most of the time it's before a letter. So I'd read this example out loud as not P. The second symbol we talked about had the classification of conjunction, and its symbol was an up arrow. We read this out loud as the word and, although we also represent the words but, however, and nevertheless with that same up arrow. They're all conjunctions. An example of using it in symbolic form is it comes in between two letters, so P and Q. It could also come in between a letter and a parenthesis. P and Q for that particular example. The third symbol we talked about was the disjunction, which is the down arrow. We read that out loud as the word or. An example of using that in symbolic form, P or Q. It comes between two letters or between a letter and a parenthesis. Or technically it could come between two parentheses even, as could the conjunction come between two parentheses. I would read this out loud, P or Q. The fourth symbol was the conditional, the arrow pointing to the right, which we read as if, then, or you might just see the word if, or the then is implied. So for example, what I'm jotting down, I would read this out loud, if P, then Q. If P, then Q. And the fifth symbol, the biconditional, which is a conditional where you have to check both directions. So you have double arrowheads here. And this relates to the phrase if and only if. So if I had this, for example, I'd read it out loud as P, if and only if Q. Now we're ready to talk about truth tables with all these symbols in the mix.